So for today, I just wanted to talk about probably what I would consider the four most important Windows Event IDs. These have served me well over numerous years, whether it was in incident response, threat hunting, offensive security, data analysis. These are the four that I would consider probably the most critical, and also the four that are the least logged. Generally by any environment I've ever gone to. The majority of the customers or clients that I've had almost never log these. So just a little bit about myself. 15 years combined IT and security experience. I've kind of worked through a little bit of everything. Incident response being the most recent, previous to working at Sumo Logic and JASK prior to that. A little bit of government work, and then all the way back to my humble beginnings as system administration, kind of when I sort of fell in love with Windows logs and data in general. So before we get started, this is probably one of the best things. I guess if you could take something away, this should like really sink in, is that if you're gonna do threat hunting in any type of capacity whatsoever, it relies on ground truth from log sources. And the same can be said with incident response. I have never gone into a customer environment during an IR engagement and say like, hey, let me see your EDR. No, I actually want to see the logs. I want to see the actual evidence of where this stuff occurred, how it went through your systems, all of that information. This is one of those things that I cannot stress enough. And we'll talk about it through a couple of slides here. It's just the importance that log sources have, especially in this day and age. It's so easily overlooked because of something nice and shiny that you have to have that looks like it does everything. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have the logs, and that's pretty much what a great threat hunting program relies on. So why Windows? This is easy for me. It's obviously the most prevalent corporate OS. I love it more than anything. You've got your default logging already enabled. These are your basic event IDs. Everyone has these. It doesn't matter. You're going to have your log on, your log off, your account creation, account locked, etc. The part that I really want to focus on today and spend more time on is the advanced audit policy. So this is not enabled by default. This actually requires, if you're the security team working with your endpoint team, to ensuring that your Windows systems administrators can get the GPOs configured to enable this stuff. And this is where you get that great visibility. I don't want to say it's the same as having like an endpoint detection and response product, but it's as close as you can get without shelling out like $1 million for like CrowdStrike or something like that. You can get this for free, and you can really tune this extremely well and catch very close to what an EDR can. Okay, so the rebuttal I always get from customers, always. I have no idea why, but we always have, you know, an EDR, an XDR, an MDR, whatever. These are great. They help. If you have limited staff, you can get some visibility that way. Unfortunately, they don't cover everything. So you're not going to get all of that same information you are from the basic Windows logs or the advanced audit policy when you configure that. The other thing is, and a lot of people just don't realize this, is these products are so easily bypassed. It's ridiculous. So you think that, you know, I've got CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, whatever on every endpoint, I'm 100% protected. Absolutely not. If we look at like the SolarWinds attack that occurred, what did they do? They immediately disabled EDR. If you look at like, if you've had a good pen test recently from like a good firm, what do they generally do? They profile your system and immediately disable the EDR. If you look at this link that's on here, I'm not going to say it, but it's that GitHub. He collects some of the most recent attacks against EDRs or ways to disable them. It's mind-blowing the amount of ways you can do this. Like some of the most basic ones are userland hooking. And then you have tools like syswhispers. You have the rise of C# programming language, which can manipulate Windows 32 APIs. So you can perform platform invoke or dynamic invokes against EDRs. You have Sharpsploit that has this integrated into it. You have SharpBlock, another tool. You have the technique of DLL unloading, and then you have the newest flavor out there right now, which is the Hell's Gate VX technique. So if you're not familiar with this stuff and you have EDRs in your environment, I highly recommend you look at these attack vectors because they are utilized. Finally, with this stuff, it's the alerts. And this can be the same for any type of security tool that's out there. If your analysts aren't trained, a lot of the times they're going to say like, oh, this looks a little weird, but oh, it's a false positive. Maybe they didn't dig far enough into it. Maybe they didn't really realize the whole scope of what was actually occurring. So there's a lot of things that can kind of cloud this. If you actually have the log sources and you have some good searches in place, you can detect all of this stuff relatively easily without having to worry. So let's go to the next one. And then this brings up probably almost always the follow-up question is, all right, this is super cool. We want Sysmon. Sysmon is awesome. I'm not going to lie about that. I love it. The problem with this is it takes more of a mature organization. I wouldn't run out and try to attempt to install Sysmon in your environment if you don't even already have advanced audit policy configured and you're not utilizing the Windows logs that you have. I like to think of Sysmon as a way to kind of blanket the holes that are within your environment. So if you look at the logging sources that you have and you have some good detections around those and you have like an EDR, you can mesh the two and then maybe look at MITRE ATT&CK and see where, you know, maybe you're not covered so well on lateral movement. Well, let's look at Sysmon and install maybe a couple of the events that are within there that can detect that relatively well. Or maybe you're interested in like DLL side loading or DLL injection. There's some good coverage in there for that as well. The other thing I like to warn people about too is do not get Swift on Security's configuration. Like, yeah, it's awesome. The guy has put a lot of work into that, but that's for his environment. That's not necessarily what your environment looks like. So when you're starting to do the config for something like this, it's thousands of lines. It takes time to baseline your environment and understand what's occurring within there before you put that in. If you're taking someone else's blank config and putting it into yours, I can guarantee there's holes there that are not going to work. Not to mention typos and issues that he's had in the past with these and the lack of updating this. So make sure you can look at it as maybe like a starting point, but if you're really going this route, you need to do it from scratch and make sure you're doing it very well. Also with this, the upside is if you enable Sysmon Event ID 1, which is process creation, you can implement mshta in there, so you can get some really, really good detections based off of that. It also has MD5, your SHA-256, etc. Those hashes are in there, but there's a lot of value that can be said from gaining hashes in your environment, and Sysmon's a really cheap and alternate way to do that. Okay, so we're going to start with what I call the holy grail of event logs, and this is Event ID 4688, process creation. So this is quite possibly the most powerful event log that you can have enabled in your environment. It has to be enabled. And if you look at the bottom there, you have to do this secondary step. If you just enable 4688, check the box, that's great. You have process creation, but the value to this comes from enabling the logging of the actual command line. And that's a secondary step that has to occur when you do this. So it gives you programs that executed, who the program ran as, processes that started this process, contains the process launch path, and this goes to the Windows security log. This is all ridiculously good information. This, like the majority of the alerts that you're going to see in any of your security products are pretty much loosely based around looking at command line arguments. And this is a great log to have, especially if you think about something like this. You want to ensure that you have longevity with these. I know everyone doesn't always read like the Verizon DBR reports, that kind of stuff, but the trend is, you know, it used to be like over a year before detection had occurred, and it's slowly coming down, but you have to ensure that you've got these logs for a significant amount of time. I know data retention is expensive. So if you're going to do this and you can't afford, you know, every workstation in your environment, select the important ones. Select your servers, select your admin workstations, HR, etc. You know who the important people are. Ensure this logging is enabled in that area. So why? why is 4688 amazing? Well, the first one is the LOBAS or LOBINS project. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. This is one of, I don't know if it's the beginning to what became known as living off the land, but it's certainly a reason it works. So these are actual signed Microsoft binaries. They're legit files. They're on every Windows system. The cool thing with these is they have really weird behavior. So if you think about it, when Microsoft created their Windows operating system, they had a ton of these processes within their OS. And some of them, I have no idea why they gave it extra functionality where you would never in a million years need this functionality. So what happens is you have researchers that take a look at these. You have APT groups that utilize these. You have adversaries that utilize these. They're amazing. They bypass application whitelists. They're useful for just about anything malicious you can possibly think of. And there's about 135 of them. The real important thing with this is something that you want to get to like your SOC team, any of your security team people, and just ensure that you have protections around this, whether that's in like your EDR, your security products, or whatever you have. Just run through the list and make sure that you can at least detect some of these. The most important ones would be the ones that have the ability to download. So if it's something that can go external and pull a file down and then execute that, you want to make sure you have detections based around that. And I can guarantee you that not all of these are covered in every security product that's out there. It's a good, like really good starting place just to give to an analyst and have them just run with it and see what they can come up with. So the first one we're going to talk about, we're only going to go over a couple. There's too many. Is regserve 32. So this one is utilized super heavily. Again, it's a Windows signed binary. It has command line utility to register and unregister DLLs and ActiveX controls in the registry. You can create persistence with this with COM objects, and you can have it be local or remote, and you can utilize this to avoid application whitelisting. The key that we see with this, and this is like the old squibbly do attack from like 2015, I believe, is they're using the scrobj DLL. So that's the script time component. And the next line down is the regserve 32/s, and then it's calling out. So what it's doing is it's calling out to that script, and it's calling the DLL, and it's going to execute that. That's why stuff like this, if you are actually looking at the command line files, or I'm sorry, the command lines being run in your environment, and you see something like regserve 32 calling out to the internet, that will never occur. Microsoft does not do that. If you see anything doing this, it's either a shady application or there's something else occurring in your environment that's definitely going to need to take a look at and sort of see where that comes from. So let's take a look at one of these. And let's see. Okay, there we go. So what this is looking at is essentially we're just looking at where we're dumping these event IDs, and we're looking at security 4688. Obviously, we want that command line, that secondary step that you must enable. And all I did was run a whole bunch of command lines, just calling out to like C2s, whatever, you can name it whatever you want, and then calling the scrobj DLL. So this is something that you can easily search for in your environment if you have these logs enabled, and stuff will stick out immediately. There's a lot of different threat hunts that you can do once you actually have this command line being logged within your environment. Like you could strip out everything in the command line and just look for IP addresses on the command line. So once you have that list, you can take that and then run it against, you know, your internal IP addresses, filter those out, and then boom, you have all your external IPs. You can filter that down, you can geocache them, and just kind of see, you know, where they're going to. There's a ton you can do with this. You can do the same thing by ripping out HTTP, HTTPS sites, anything that you would want with these command lines. There's a lot of ways to look at this. You could easily here switch out regserve32 and put in any of the other lolbins or lolbas that you want to look at that have download functionality, and you'll immediately see that. You can hunt for weeks with these command lines once you have them enabled in your environment and find all sorts of interesting stuff. It's just awesome. Okay, so let's go back to this and we'll go to the next one. This is also one of the most abused of all time, mshta. Again, Windows signed binary. This uses .hta files. This is a favorite of ransomware groups. When they send a phish and download a .hta, this is utilized heavily by them. So these are the locations to it. So you have your system32 and your syswile64. This can execute all the things, like any script at all. It's scary how powerful this is. And you can even make it worse. You can break it up into alternate data streams. Again, the command line that we're looking for here is it's going to be http some web server somewhere in the world downloading a .hta file. There's multiple ways that this can be achieved, like I said before, like via email, but you're going to get it on the command line. Essentially, this is just going to open that HTA, execute the embedded code, and you do not need admin rights for this at all. So this can occur on any user's workstation, which is why phishing is extremely dangerous for this type of attack. So what we'll do is the same thing we did with regserve32. Let's take a look and see. So here's another one. This is an awesome tool too, Atomic Red Team. I'm sure the majority of you guys and gals have heard of this. If you could do it, get it set up in your environment. And this is a great way to test the detections that you have, the hunts that you have, see if you can pick this type of stuff up. This is just based off of the tactic and the technique. You run those two and then it does it for you. And essentially you can see if you can find it. Right here, we're looking at getting the object and it's pulling down an SCT file. Again, it can run just about anything. So it's another awesome lolbin to look at. This one is heavily utilized as well. So I would start with regserve32, mshta, and sort of see where you can go from there with either of those. They're both great to look at. There's a lot of interesting stuff that occurs. There's even, I think like Adobe utilized them for a while too. Like if you had like Reader, I think it would do a lot with like mshta, which was really sketchy. I'm not sure why it did that. But you will find some legitimate applications occasionally, but it will not be a Windows application doing it. Okay. So the next, this is probably, this one just surprises me every time. And I guess you could tell sort of the maturity of the attacker or adversary. If you look at the command lines, occasionally, depending on the security posture of your environment, you will come across people that do not rename things. This even happens with red teams, and it's hilarious if you can catch them with this because it's like shaming them completely. They will utilize Mimikatz without renaming it. So there are like really, really simple ways you can just search for that name and see what occurs. And I call that catching slackers, just because they're too lazy to actually do their tradecraft well. This is the same thing with malicious tools. You can catch all sorts of tooling this way if the attacker does not rename it. The other thing that we had mentioned earlier on with Sysmon 1, which is their process creation, but it can contain the mhash if you enable it for that. Another really cool trick with this is you can mhash a lot of the tooling that red teams and adversaries utilize. And that mhash, if they don't change the source code or the import list to that actual application, you can catch them with it. So they can rename Mimikatz to like whatever they want. It could be, you know, dog, and they run that and they haven't changed the actual way that that program operates. You will catch that with an mhash. It works extremely well. Something really cool to look at and one of the biggest benefits to Sysmon. So let's take a look at this and see. So right here, we're looking at endpoint process. We're looking for Sysmon 1, and we're looking for 4688. And what we're looking for, this is just a super simple regex, nothing crazy. We're just looking for a match on invoke mimikatz or the tags that it has for dump creds or dump certs. And again, you can see a ton of this stuff within here. So PowerShell Mafia, this is PowerShell. It's calling down PowerSploit to pull down mimikatz. This is the kind of stuff that you can find. There's so much in here. Again, you can use Atomic Red Team for this, and this will get a lot of that. The key thing here, and we'll touch on it a bit later, is if you look at PowerShell. So again, this is via the command line. We're actually seeing this via 4688 with the command line auditing enabled. Is we're getting this IEX new object.NET web client download string. Does anyone know what that does? I'll let Paul figure it out. He's in chat right now. But essentially, what that does is that is pulling down mimikatz and running it immediately into memory. So if you think about like living off the land where the attacker doesn't bring anything onto the computer, essentially, this is one of the techniques that they utilize to do that, is they're invoking this into memory so there's no file touching the disk. So a lot of AV isn't going to find that. A lot of EDRs might, depends. Some might not. If you change this file enough, they'll never find it. And that's one of the benefits to actually auditing these command lines is you can detect this type of activity occurring in the environment. Same thing with the living off the land binaries. A lot of that stuff isn't going to be picked up. And we can do one more for this. And this actually works. I've actually found stuff this way in certain environments. It just depends really on the level of effort that the adversary or like the red team or pen test, whatever is going on in the environment, whatever they're going to do. But you can actually find stuff this way. And Bloodhound's another example. There's really, really complex ways to detect Bloodhound that aren't via command line. And that's generally how you're going to actually be able to find it. But occasionally you can shoot for the moon, and this can pay off sometimes. This is also like a great way to get like a tier 1 analyst involved. They may not have the ability to write a complex regex, but you can start them with something like this and say like, hey, how would we go about detecting Bloodhound in our environment? This might be a great first step for a first query, and then start building the complexity into this query as the analyst learns more about the tooling and the logging that's occurring within your environment. Okay. Another favorite. This one is awesome. So most people that I've dealt with in the past have some form of application whitelisting in their environment, but they're never really baselining their environment. So they don't really know if things are getting around that application whitelist. And one of the benefits to this is you can run a super simple query that looks for short exe names. This also happens to be the calling card of not just DarkSide, but like just about any criminal enterprise that's out there. They don't name anything like malicious.exe. It's going to be like 123 ABC, whatever. It's going to be super short, just like these in here, and make absolutely no sense. And you're going to have no idea what that is. This is an awesome way to baseline the applications that are being run in your environment and see if there's things that are going on that should not be within your environment. So let's run this one. And keep in mind too, this can be, the data you can get back from this can be tremendous. You can have a ton of data coming back depending on how many endpoints are within your environment. Like if you have 1,000 plus, you can get a lot. So obviously we have a ton here. All I'm doing is looking for, again, a little bit more complex regex, but it's still not super hard. We're just looking for 1 to 5 characters with an exe on here. So as you can see here, we've got numbers. If you haven't baselined your environment and you're not familiar with what everything is, the easiest way to do this is look at the lowest. So we'll just assume everything, above 20 or whatever, however many you would like to do are legit in your environment, and start examining all of these that are going on. So you have curl, you have rar, setup, mshta, WMIC, UPFC. These are great to start looking at and figuring out what is occurring in your environment. We found many, many, many bad things this way, and it's the easiest search of all time. Just data stack this, just start with the least amount and just kind of hunt through them. Remember, you're going to get the parent process with this because you have Event ID 4688, so you can see what's launching this. You can see pretty much anything occurring with this for the most part. There will be a little bit of Google foo you will have to do to find these, some of them, but after time, you'll be able to figure this out. And a great way to do this too is once you see something that maybe you don't want within your environment or you're curious about, like curl.exe, you can easily convert this to a dashboard just to run like over a 7-day window, log in, take a look at that dashboard, see all the information that's in there, see if it's legitimate use from like maybe, I don't know, your developers, or maybe it's from an area in your environment where that should not be occurring. Your other option here too is you can update your application whitelist. So, maybe you guys missed a couple of applications, add them to it, and you can go from there. Okay, next up, 4698, another of my favorite. This one is schedule all of the things. So this is scheduled task creation. This logs new scheduled tasks that are created. It gives you the account name, so who created it. It gives you the logon ID. That can be correlated to 4624 for session information, who logged on, etc. These also go to the security log. This is, without a doubt, the most commonly utilized persistent mechanism that I almost ever run across. And it's also probably the least logged log I come across as well too. I don't know why, but it really needs to be audited more. Again, this is via the advanced audit policy. If you look at like the MITRE attack, it's insane the amount of groups that are within there that utilize this as a persistence mechanism. Like, I have no idea why people do not log this and do not audit this. It's crazy. So we'll just give you an example. This is one of the groups. This is Sharp Panda. So hypothetically, it's a Chinese APT group targeting Asian governments. They utilize spear phishing. They use RTF files. This is the equation editor vulnerability from back in the day. And their persistence is a scheduled task called Windows Update. This loads Cobalt Strike via regserve32 daily. There's another way to catch this. If you're auditing your command lines, you might actually see regserve32 calling Cobalt Strike. It's another way to catch this. The best way would be to actually audit scheduled tasks and ensure that you're looking at these. This checkpoint article is awesome. It gives you a ton of information about the group, but they're not the only group that does this. There are so many that do this. So again, I mentioned the MITRE attack. This is just a snippet. I think it would have been like 10 slides had I taken the entire snapshot of everything that utilizes scheduled tasks as a persistence mechanism. And keep in mind too, the other reason that they do this is it survives reboot. So if you reboot the computer, that scheduled task will run and they will maintain their persistence. So this is probably the biggest problem with auditing these is, depending on the environment, these can be out of control. This again is another time where you absolutely want to ensure that you're baselining your environment. You want to know the scheduled tasks that are created by Windows, by the applications that you guys allow within your environment, and make sure you see those. Again, stack the numbers. The highest level, if you've like 4,000 that are running Windows Update, that's probably legitimate. If you have like 2 or 3 machines that are running maybe like Windows Update misspelled or something like that, that's not. You want to take a look at that and see why it's occurring. It's rare anymore that they're going to name the scheduled task like X, Y, Z, D, whatever, because they know that that sticks out. So a lot of times they're cloning scheduled tasks that you're going to see in an environment. You'll see like a lot of Google ones that occur because almost everyone utilizes Chrome, same with like Firefox, etc. They'll try to rename Windows stuff that way as well too. So again, this is what I had mentioned. You've got to baseline this and do a routine auditing of the scheduled tasks. They're so often undetected, and I don't know, it kind of hurts my heart a little bit. Like, this is one of those event IDs that should be logged everywhere and definitely taken a look at and definitely taken more serious. Heavily utilized by ransomware. Again, another example, like we looked at Sharp Panda using Windows Update. Maze utilized Windows Update Security, Windows Update Security patches, Google Chrome Security Update. So they're switching from the stuff that sticks out to stuff that blends in a little bit better. But again, if you're baselining this stuff and you're taking a proactive approach to it, you can identify this. I think I have one for this too. So let's take a look at this. Okay. So this is super simple. This is just in our lab. I just loaded a little bit of data in, but these AC Power installs are legitimate. Scheduled retry scan, that's legitimate. OneDrive, legitimate. Obviously, /Windows Update, no idea. Evil, no idea. Chrome, no idea. Windows, reverse shell, probably bad. This Google Update Task Machine Core is actually legitimate. But this is the process. Just run a simple search like this, strip out the task name, and just stack it. And you'll immediately start to formalize a baseline, and then you can immediately start to see where things stick out or maybe they shouldn't, or, you know, certain machines have these tasks created where maybe they shouldn't have any scheduled tasks created at all. Again, this is another thing you could easily set up to a dashboard, set it on like a 7-day or 14-day window, and just monitor that and just sort of take a look at, you know, the bottom couple every day and sort of see what occurs. This is a great way to catch things early, because generally like the second or third stage that an adversary does with persistence is immediately they're going to schedule this. They want to maintain that persistence before they even pivot. Okay, the next one, 4697, service creation. This is another awesome one. This one I do want to call out though, because a lot of people don't know that this is new. So with Windows 10 in 2016, they added this as an advanced audit policy option. The reason they did that was to enable this to be logged in the security log. Prior to Windows 10, this was enabled by default in the system log. And in the system log, it's 7045. The issue with this is if you're any type of analyst, you're almost never going to look in the system log, like never. I know I never did doing security work, and almost anyone I interact with doesn't, unless there's some form of sysadmin looking at like actual hardcore system information. So I think this is a good thing. I would say install this for everyone. You get all of this information out of it, unless you're already looking at 7045. And keep in mind too, when you're forwarding event logs, like I don't know how many people forward their entire system log, not many. So adding this into your security log, you're already forwarding all of your security events to whatever system's retaining all of those for you. This is just a no-brainer. It just throws it in there. You have access to this, and it's super powerful. There's a lot of information that can be gleaned from this, and it's definitely something that I would do. Okay, another group, APT 41. Again, suspected to operate on behalf of China. So they carried out a ton of exploitation recently, scanning essentially the entire internet for the Citrix ADC vuln. They utilized Bits admin to download it and install, then they leveraged that to SCEXE to install Cobalt Strike. This is an awesome report to read. It's super thorough. It's by FireEye. There's a lot that can be gained from this. One of the things that I'm not going to cover today that I highly recommend anyone do if they have the visibility into it is to hunt through your bits admin jobs or look at like the bits traffic that's going out of your environment. It is the easiest way to exfil out of an environment undetected due to Windows utilizing it. Like there's so many applications that leverage bits now that it's ridiculous, and almost everyone allows that through on pretty much undetected. We will talk about sc.exe. So again, this one is maybe not as prolific as scheduled task creation, but service creation is still utilized heavily for persistence, and it's extremely powerful. This is, again, just a snapshot of what can be utilized for that. These are the groups. If you take a deeper dive into MITRE ATT&CK, you'll find way more that are in there in different ways that this can actually be achieved. We're just going to go over a couple today. So the first one, this one is awesome. Remote service creation. This should not be in your environment, at least expected. Applications, I don't know. Some do this, some legitimately, some not. And then employees. Sysadmins probably do this, but anyone else should never be doing this in their environment. This is an example of sc.exe on a command line. So it's just the target host. Create evil service. Bin path is the actual file that they're going to utilize. And there you go. The one below that is WMI. That one is extremely hard to catch. So let's take a look at sc.exe. Okay, so what we're doing here, this is very much like what we just did with the scheduled task creation. We're stacking the service name. We're just going to look at anything that doesn't look right. Again, one of the favorites is service host, switching that for an O with a 0, Windows Update with a 1. There's tons of ways to do this. Evil WMI service, etc. Evil PsExec. There's 1,000 different ways to do this. But again, if you start stacking this and looking at it, you can kind of start to pick these out as you know more that are good. Same thing. Create a dashboard, run this over maybe like 7 or 14 days, look at the data, and just sort of see what's occurring with the environment. As you read reports from like Talos, FireEye, Unit 42, etc., a lot of the indicators that they share will be the service name. So you can easily hunt that service name and see if it's been created anywhere within your environment. The other one is WMI. This one's a little bit harder to find. Obviously, we're going to get it with the service creation. So we're going to see what's actually occurring with this. You can pick this up if they did this via command line with 4688 and the command line auditing installed. So we can see the path name is the evil service. The display name will be evil WMI service. These are, again, definitely worth looking at. One of the things that I would pay particular attention to is if you wanted to do another hunt based off of this would be to look in your environment for service call create with WMI. There's a lot of interesting things that can be done maliciously in an environment and very undetected. Utilizing service call create and process call create paired with WMIC. So that's like a super interesting hunt that you can do. And that sometimes will turn up very, very bad things. Sometimes not. I mean, obviously Windows utilizes WMIC for a lot, but you can find some really good things that way. Okay, PsExec. This one's kind of a pain point for me. Like at this point in the world, I don't think any environment or any legitimate enterprise should be utilizing PsExec in any form. You have PowerShell now. There's no need for this. and it would be like the easiest win of all time if anyone utilized PsExec immediately alert on it. Obviously, this can be renamed a million different ways. There's a million different tools that can do this, but the hardest thing for me is hunting an environment where they have admins that are actually still utilizing PsExec and they're still utilizing PowerShell. I mean, you can cut half that noise out by having the admins utilize one tool, especially one common tool like PowerShell that's probably used throughout the rest of your environment. It's something I would definitely take a look at. This still from time to time gets wins with it. Whoops. It's definitely still worth looking at. So this just creates a service on the target host, and then you can pretty much find it that way. Depends on the environment, and unfortunately, it can be super easily renamed. There's a million different tools that can do this. You can even code your own relatively quickly in an environment. So let's look at like a couple of ways you can look at this, depending on the data that you have. So obviously, the first one is 4688. So we've got this going on. We're looking for PsExec. There's a whole lot in here. So we've got the Windows 10 admin machine, PsExec being utilized there. So that's looking at it via the command line with 4688. Another way to look at this is we are going to look at our service creation. So we can see with service creation, the service file name right here is PsExec, and the service name is PsExec. DC. So this is what gets copied onto the target machine. This is another way to identify that in the environment. And there is yet another way. If you have network data, you can find it via that too. So we're looking for a pipe read with PsExec. So the reference file name will be that PsExec ES service. Same thing, same way we caught it with the service creation. You can do the same thing if you have network visibility. So there's three ways you can capture this. So it's 4688 with command line. It is your 4697 service creation, or it is via network. This is why I highly, highly recommend if you're utilizing this environment in your environment, stop it, utilize PowerShell, and then have these detections for this. It's just a quick win. And then you immediately know that there's no legitimate use for this in your environment. Okay. So let's move on from PsExec. Okay. So this is another awesome saying. If you are not logging and auditing PowerShell, your company is easily 7 years behind the adversary. Yeah, I made this up. I'm sorry. But it's so true. I can't tell you how many companies I've gone into where incidents have occurred and they have zero PowerShell logging. It's so prevalent that the adversaries have given up, for the most part, utilizing PowerShell if they're really good. They've switched to WMI and C# because there's so many detections for PowerShell now that like this should be completely covered in your environment. There's no excuse for it anymore. This has to be audited. So we're going to look at 4104. This is script block logging. So this audits and captures the full command line of the PowerShell script. Tells you who executed the script, when the script occurred, how it ended up here. And the awesome thing that works, I don't know, some of the time, is it actually deobfuscates the script block. Not all the time, but enough where you can generally detect that something's malicious. So these logs, they do not go to security. They go to Microsoft Windows PowerShell operational. It's just another point to monitor. The paired log with this, when you enable it generally, is it would be Event ID 4103, and that's PowerShell module logging. The reason I only said 4104 is, again, to save money. I know that these logs can be verbose depending on the utilization of PowerShell within your environment. So if you had to pick between one or the other, 4104 would be the one that I would go with every time. It just has more information in it that's far more valuable. So another threat group, this one, Wizard Spider, everyone should be somewhat aware of this group because they operate RIAC. This is all over the news. And I'm sure the majority of you are well aware that they are also the world record holder for going from email to domain-wide ransomware in about 2 hours. That's nightmare fuel. They leverage Cobalt Strike, AD Find, WMI, VSFTP, PowerShell, etc. Rubius. Defense evasion, they utilize PowerShell to disable Windows Defender, which actually works surprisingly well. The reference for this is the DFRI report. Highly recommend you guys read that if you haven't, or take a look at it. The information in there is invaluable. Okay, this is where things get interesting with PowerShell. So we're just going to do a quick primer on this, like super quick. So PowerShell has obfuscation and aliases. The problem with this is if you write a detection or you write a hunt job, there's a million different ways that these things can be utilized. So if I wanted to write a hunt against invoke expression, well, that can be bypassed if the adversary utilizes IEX capital or IEX lowercase, or however many ways they want to do that. PowerShell is not case sensitive. Same thing with Windows style, same thing with no profile, same thing with command, execution policy. These are the common ones that are utilized on almost every PowerShell command line that's malicious in some form. If this wasn't bad enough, this is an awesome article by Daniel Bohannon. This is his GitHub where the project's located. There's talks by him on YouTube all over the place. He researched this and made it like 4,000 times harder to catch with the obfuscation that he utilized. And he has since done the same with C and C#, which is, it's just ridiculous. But this is a great talk. You'll learn a ton from this. It'll give you a lot of background on the many ways that PowerShell can be utilized and how to sort of prime your detection against all of these. So this is one of the cool things though. If you're in the actual PowerShell terminal and you type get help and say you're like, I don't know, like I have no idea the aliases that can be utilized for invoke web request. If you type get help invoke web request, it lists the aliases here. So you have IWR, wget, curl. You can do this with just about everything in PowerShell, so it will give you all of the known ones. Definitely recommend checking that out. This is the problem though. So you can set an alias in PowerShell to anything you want it to be. So if you set the alias to like web for invoke web request, now your alias is web. The good thing though is this only lasts for the user session. So if an adversary does do something like this, it's going to look weird unless they're able to do this on all of the systems. It's going to stick out and you're going to have this probably fail a bunch of times if they're trying to pivot to another machine with this or whatever they're trying to do. But it's one of those things where there's just, why did Microsoft allow this to happen? But there's a lot of ways that aliases can be achieved within PowerShell. Okay. What we had talked about at the very beginning, loading into memory. This is just brutal. This is what I think living off the land came from in like the term fileless malware. But it's the easiest way to bypass AV and EDR. If you're not auditing the command line, you're not going to see this. This is exactly what we looked at before with the bypass, the no op, and then you have your IEX, so your invoke expression. New object, .NET web client, and you're going to download whatever from this website, malware.ps1. So if we look for something like this, there's a couple things we can do. We want to so while this isn't going to catch everything, because we had mentioned before, -ENC could be -encoded, -E. There's a lot of aliases for this within there. Generally, though, a lot of what we see, this is going to find stuff. You're going to be able to still pull out these encoded commands. There's going to be a lot of information within these. You could have this look for every iteration. that's definitely a way to start hunting for this. It will pick up a lot of this information. But obviously, depending on the environment that you're in and the applications that are utilized in that environment, you could have legitimate encoded traffic. There's a lot of admin tools out there that all of the commands and everything that they do are encoded. This is, again, something where you kind of want to take a look at and sort of see what the parent process is. If it's parent process is like LandDesk, you're probably good. That could be something that you could maybe whitelist out. But generally speaking, almost anything encoded in the environment needs to be checked out. There shouldn't really ever be a reason for that stuff to occur within your environment. The other thing to look at too is if you haven't, start looking at anytime PowerShell attempts to download something. I know some environments, they have this blocked so that the user agent for PowerShell can't go outbound. That's awesome to do. That will prevent a lot of this. Another thing that you could look at, but you can see that we do have a ton, like there's so many things that you can possibly download with this. A lot. Again, this probably is occurring legitimately in your environment. There's a lot of applications that do this, but you can whitelist those. You can take a look at everything that's downloading and see, is it actually really important? Is there an alternate way for it to download that information? Is it worth it in the long run? There's a ton that you can do with this. These are just two basic examples, but the detections around PowerShell are something that should be prevalent in every single environment that's out there. It's bad when the adversaries, like the good ones, have pivoted from this because it's too easy to detect. And if you're not detecting this, then the easiest people, I guess, are getting into your environment. It's something that must be logged at this point. Okay. So as we wrap up, the 3 key takeaways. This is probably what I would say would be like the most important things to remember. So event logs are your ground truth. You have to audit them and ensure you have solid coverage before you go buy the next shiny thing. This is building your house strong. You want multiple layers of defense. You have this stuff for free. So utilize it, make sure there's detections around it, make sure you hunt with it, it's there. Next, enable your advanced audit policy. Obviously, the 4 event IDs that we have talked about today. And then the next thing is look for gaps in your visibility. Enable the log sources to fill those gaps. You may not need all 4 of these. You may have something that covers one of them extremely well. Well, maybe then audit the other 3 that are out there. This is the same principle that I like to tell clients that want Sysmon in their environment. First, baseline your EDR or whatever security tool you're utilizing in there. Look at your email security. Then ensure that you have the log sources needed to detect a full attack from endpoint to endpoint. If you can do all of that, then start messing with Sysmon and you can start getting into a little bit more that's going to fill that defense out even more. Remember, like if you actually have an IR in your environment and it's serious and you call in an IR team, they are not going to want your EDR. If that's the only tool that you have there, they're going to have to utilize it, but they're never going to find how it really occurred. They're going to need logs for that. So ensure that you actually have these logs enabled and just slowly chip away at it. Build your security maturity up, and then eventually you'll be at an awesome point and you'll have all of this stuff covered. So that's all I have. And thank everyone very, very much.